Putin is seething with everything will be different after this most recent operation in Ukraine. Every advantage that Russia had acquired has been completely nullified. Russia is now in a difficult position as a result of the trouble at the airport in Melitopol following operations in Ukraine and Kherson's intervention. Russia has lost its position of dominance. The portion that is in the region is thinking about it, very anxious. The Russian military does not possess the necessary weapons to successfully navigate this crisis. The conflict between Russia and Ukraine witnessed a series of very significant turning points, one after the other. The Ukrainian intelligence service was eventually successful in penetrating the network through which the Russian troops communicated with one another. They were able to do so thanks to a report from Newsday that stated that it originated from the Kremlin. These aircraft, which had their home base at Chaplin Sky Airport, took off one after the other and were directed to a vacant field for the purpose of a training exercise. The Ukrainian army that was waiting in the area made preparations to detonate their bombs at Lincoln Airport. This infuriated Putin to a high degree. Recently, the Ukrainian military has been making requests for fighter jets from a number of different countries, most notably the United, because these fighter jets could potentially start a third war on the planet. No one wants to give them to the Ukraine in an effort to level the playing field. The Ukrainian army has also recently made a very significant move against Russia because the operation itself was so successful. Kherson was taken prisoner by Ukraine in its entirety. Recent months have seen significant growth in the amount of progress made by the Ukrainian armed forces in the realm of NT. Because of the training they received from both Israeli and American intelligence, Ukrainian soldiers have come a long way in a short amount of time. Because of this, the Ukraine has been able to achieve a commanding position in the conflict. This dominance made Russia uneasy, so they planned to continuously bomb Ukraine with warplanes. But their plans were dealt a significant setback. The Ukraine is currently in the process of transitioning to a new point in order to complete its dominance in the region. This attack on Russian airspace will be the end of the Russian army. This is just one of the many benefits that the Ukrainian intelligence service has obtained as a result of the entry of the Ukrainian army into the communication network. At this point has resulted in a notable rise in the overall efficiency of the operate. One of these improvements is that the Ukraine pretended to be the Kremlin and issued orders to Russian fighter jets while in disguise. The plan that the Ukrainian army came up with will be written in golden letters. In the annals of military history, warplanes from Russia carried out an attack after receiving what they believed to be an order from the Kremlin. This ensured that there was no one left behind at the Choplinka airfield, which was being used as a hiding spot by the Ukrainian. The Russian military did not anticipate that Ukrainian troops would be able to enter this area of the map. As a result, there was a significant explosion at the airport, which had not been adequately prepared. This airport was destroyed by the sea power used by the Ukrainians, who are moving quickly because of the interference in the signals. The Russian warplanes were unaware of this inform. Following Ukraine's withdrawal from the area, Russian warplanes made their way back because they were unable to make contact with the center. The Russians, who were perplexed as to what they should do in light of what they saw, fled for people from the military. However, the real operation hadn't even started yet. The Ukrainian military placed long-range Patriots along the flight path of the enemy warplanes, which they anticipated would be heading in the direction of Melitopol. These Patriots began engaging in combat with fighter planes that were flying through the area. When the fighter planes were unable to determine the origin of the attack, they were at a loss for what to do and quickly headed towards Moscow in an attempt to find shelter there. However, while flying towards Moscow, Russian planes were shot down by enemy forces. The Ukraine capitalized on this opportunity and made the decision to initiate the primary operate. Ambush positions were taken by the Ukrainian army behind them, not far from the castle. Soldiers from Ukraine who were waiting for news took advantage of the evacuation of the Russian airport and began their operation in the direction of Kherson. The Russian 126 Guards Coastal Defense Brigade was heading towards the area where the airport was blown up when the Ukrainian army invaded, which caused the brigade to leave its positions. This was the reason for the invasion. In a short operation, the Russian army, which did not have any warplanes, was almost naked here. This occurred as a result of the mobilization of the Ukrainian army, which became a force of influence. As with any other operation, the response from Ukraine was to use directors. There was nothing that could have stopped the bioreactors because the S-300 seconds that had been installed at the airport had also been damaged. The Ukrainians took advantage of this situation by launching an attack with directors against Russia's 126th Coastal Defense Brigade. After making some attempts to respond, the Russian army withdrew when they realized that their air defense systems were not functioning properly. The Ukrainian military had a great deal to be excited about following their victory in Kherson after this move, which demonstrated that the war was now completely in Ukraine's. Putin became very angry, and for the first time he threatened NATO with a very serious nuclear missile explosion. This move proved that the war was now completely in Ukraine's favor. In response to this, the member states of both the European Union and NATO declared that they would maintain their unwavering support. But the exciting part didn't begin until much later. The arbitrary nuclear threats made by Putin disturbed a great number of, one group in particular, being the G7 countries, which are regarded as the fundamental components of the global economy. They, along with the rest of the world, were alarmed by Russia's threats to undermine global peace and stability. After that, a string of embargoes was imposed, which rocked the foundation to its core. It is anticipated that the actions taken by Germany, Japan, and Serbia will deal the most significant blow to Russia's already struggling economy at this. However, Japan has demonstrated once more that it is now on the Ukrainian side by remaining consistent with these embargoes. Since the beginning of the conflict, Japan has contributed approximately $600 million in aid installments to Ukraine. After the incident at the site, Japan declared that it would redirect its assistance to a different location. The heightening of tensions within the Russian army has also contributed to this phenomenon. The height of Japan's reduction is now $5.5 billion, down from $600 million previously. This is a sign that Ukraine will now advance to an entirely new point in terms of the modernization of the armed forces. The Ukraine, which has just recently been given support from a large number of tanks in a row, has recently begun discussing an extremely ambitious. Analysts of the conflict believe that the Ukraine is currently making preparations to shift its armed forces from a defensive position into an offensive position. It is unknown what kind of thoughts Ukraine will have after this preparation, but based on estimates, Ukraine has the potential to take the war in an entirely new direction. Point has been able to improve its offensive capabilities thanks to the weapons it has. In order for the Ukrainian army to be in a position to launch sufficient assaults, this must be the foundation. One of the situations that Ukraine can take advantage of is the fact that the Russian army is currently in such a helpless situation. In response to Ukraine, Vladimir Putin has placed his entire army on the defensive, and Ukraine is currently preparing for an offensive while also organizing a major event to expel Russia from its T. This comes after Russia suffered consecutive defeats at the hands of Ukraine. Although the United States stated at the very beginning of the conflict that the weapons and ammunition it was providing to Ukraine were meant to assist Ukraine in defending itself, neither the Abrams nor the Leopard 2 tanks are designed to be used in self-defense situations. Because of this, the Ukrainian armed forces are now in a position to repel the occupying forces rather than defend them. As a result of the Russian army's continued failures, it is now expected that Ukraine will fight more aggressively to win the war. This is due to the fact that Putin has entered a phase in which he is receiving the least amount of support he has received since the beginning of the war. The public's reaction against Putin has increased as a result of the lack of support he has. This demonstrates to the entire world that questions regarding Putin's legitimacy could be raised in the not-too-distant future by Russian taxpayers. Either that or Putin is wrong now, rather than being allowed to flounder around aimlessly. Ideas and actions want to be properly governed as a direct result of the circumstances. Putin's assurances regarding Ukraine gradually lost their significance. One by Putin has been unable to fulfill his promise to seize control of Ukraine after claiming that he would do so in just 1 week. This has caused even those who supported him at the beginning of the war to lose their support, and it is widely believed that this is the turning point that will bring about Putin's downfall. Putin is presently in an extremely difficult position. Israel has recently begun to support Ukrainian rebels in their heated. The Israeli F-16s are currently in motion on the Russian supply line that ran from Iran to Moscow. There was a significant explosion. War will never again be fought in the same manner. In the waning hours of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, the entire world watched was separated into their own individual sections. The decision made by Russia to maintain its restrictive policies was at the center of all the up. As a result of the events that transpired, Russia has been unable to garner even the most minimal support in the context of international relations. Russia has been left in such a great degree of isolation that it has begun to receive assistance from another country that finds itself in a similar position. The topic of these aids is being discussed all over the. It is possible for Nova to determine the objectives of the nation that has been so instrumental in the growth of the Russian military. Due to the current state of affairs, people all over the world are discussing the prospect of a third global war. However, there has been a significant response to these aids. The most recent action taken by Israel has once again demonstrated that everything that can be done to harm Russia will be. Recently, the situation for the Russian army has become quite difficult as a result of the ammunition and equipment that was abandoned during the withdrawal from Ukraine. Russian soldiers have begun using equipment that was developed during the time of the Soviet Union. The operations that Putin wants to organize have been dealt a severe blow as a result of, mainly due to the fact that the Russian soldiers started coming to the realization of how significant the support was for the modernization of Ukraine. As a response to this, they started looking for allies and contacted countries that they could get support from in this matter. One of the most important of these was a country that the United States imposed intense embargoes on, so this support was particularly valuable too. Israel gave a very severe response to Russia, which asked for support from Iran, which endangers world peace. Israel's response was very harsh. Iran started to gather its forces in order to fulfill Russia's demand for support. Not only Israel, but all Western countries have expressed their outrage in response to this development. Intelligence services from the United States and Israel collaborated to investigate how much support Iran was providing. When the rest of the world found out what Iran was doing, they were all taken aback. Up to this point, Iran has delivered approximately 1,000 drones to Russia. After that, it came to light that Iran was shipping 30,000 artillery shells to Russia, each and every. Iran, on the other hand, has gone too far with this most recent support. Since the beginning of the conflict, Iran has consistently demonstrated its solidarity with Russia in spite of the fact that it has repeatedly denied this to the United Nations. The truth has been brought to light by documents and studies. As a direct result of these revelations, Western countries began providing Ukraine with a more robust level of Ukraine has arrived at a different point in the beginning of the support, particularly in the field of intelligence. However, Israel decided that they had detected aid that would significantly strengthen Russia, so they literally blew up this convoy of vehicles in addition to the large number of tanks and the 1,000 drones that Iran will send to. Israeli intelligence has obtained information indicating that Iran is making preparations to send an additional 500 tanks and 1,000 drones to Russia. The Israeli Air Force took action once it was determined that the first part of this would be completed in a relatively short amount of time. A short time before this, Israel had previously used drones to blow up 2 buildings that were part of the Iranian defense. The most recent strike carried out by the Israeli Air Force completely obliterated the Iranian convoy. Using II helicopters, Israel has started gathering the necessary intelligence in order to determine the type of attack Iran will carry out in this area. After that, the intensive work of the Mossad was discovered. The Israeli military became aware that there had been a significant breach of. It was determined that Iran's air defense systems were not located in the region that the convoy traveled through. Because of this, Israel was able to carry out a very successful operation utilizing F-16s. Damascus served as the starting point for the Iranian convoy's journey to Moscow. F-16s conducted a raid on this convoy before it was able to leave Iranian airspace as a direct result of the discovery of this. Due to the lack of any air defense systems, the only option left for the convoy was to retreat. This withdrawal was strictly forbidden by the Israeli army. Israeli F-16s heavily damaged the supplies in this convoy, initially targeting the armored vehicles at the head of the convoy. This ridiculous Israeli strategy ultimately resulted in the complete obstruction of the entire con. However, the jammers were the most important factor as they prevented Iran from receiving any assistance from the center. Because the Israeli army activated these jammers in a nearby area, the Iranian convoy was left naked as the Iranian soldiers fled. After successive bombardments, the Israeli army destroyed the entire convoy in this area. As soon as Putin learned about this turn of events, he became angry. After receiving this information, the Ukrainian army quickly came to the conclusion that even the most meager assistance to Russia was being cut off by its allies. This was a huge morale booster for the Ukrainian military. This support, which was decisive for Ukraine's next steps in many areas, proved to everyone that the world was in the grip of great turmoil, that of the Ukrainian on the other. Mexico maintained the same pro-peace policy that it has maintained throughout the entirety of the conflict, mobilized to liberate their territory, which had been unjustly annexed by Russia. Ukrainians are now beginning to agree that the war has turned in their favor for Russia. It is unclear how it will get out of this predicament. Analysts at VRA believe that the Ukrainian military is in a morally and strategically superior position to that of Russia. On the other hand, Russia is finding itself in an increasingly dire situation on a daily basis as a result of a string of losses and poor management. As a result of these conditions, it is anticipated that more support will be extended to Ukraine from the rest of the world. However, there are credible forecasts that indicate support for Russia will shrink even further even those who want to support Russia are unable to do so because the support and aid given to the Russian army are also being cut off by Western countries. Putin, who is forced to face major problems, not only economically, but also in terms of the army, has run out of solutions despite the fact that the troubled process that Russia is going through is unlikely to end without support. The Russian military has lost all desire to fight for Putin's. It is common knowledge that Vladimir Putin started this war, which offers no advantages to the people of Russia, and he is able to keep it going due to the fact that he is competent. Putin does everything in his power to stifle any response to this. The Russian people are organizing in an effort to flee the country altogether as a direct result of the oppression that exists in their country. This will leave Putin without soldiers, as well as the ability to collect tax. In order to play his last trump card, he is providing people in Russia with detailed permits that allow them to leave the country. As a direct result of this, 5.4 million Russian citizens were granted passports in 2022 alone. Everyone in Russia who was deemed healthy enough to serve in the military made their way out of the country one by. In light of the recent developments, it is clear why Russia has fared so poorly in this conflict. Russia's armed forces are forced to contend with a very significant unwillingness on the part of their citizens. The people of Russia have been forced to come up with lame justifications for not enlisting in the military as a direct result of Putin's misguided policies. The fact that Russia is currently experiencing a severe economic downturn is one of the primary reasons for this. The predicament that the Russian people find themselves in as a result of these economic challenges has been watched carefully by people all over the world. It has been determined that Russia is in a situation in which it cannot be a competitor to Ukraine because it cannot find these collapses in the right way. The reason for this determination is that Russia is unable to find collapses in the right. People in Russia blame Vladimir Putin for the country's ongoing economic crisis and high unemployment rates. As a result, despite the fact that it was anticipated that Putin would fight unemployment, the fact that he did not take any steps in this direction completely destroyed the trust that the Russian people had in Putin. Putin is well aware that if he is defeated in Ukraine, he will lose his power and no longer be in control of. Despite the fact that he is continuing his attacks, he does not plan to invade Ukraine at any point. Big revolt in Russia. Putin is being pressured to end the conflict by Russian mothers. The greatest catastrophe that humanity has ever faced is war. Those who live through those terrifying moments on the battlefield are changed in ways that they can never fully. On the battlefield, you have no choice but to kill and stay pink, even though it is not nearly as simple as it may appear. It's either kill or be killed here. This tragic event is the most excruciating ordeal that a human being can go through. It has the potential to completely obliterate a person's mental state. It is estimated that approximately 25 million soldiers perished during the Second World, which is considered to be the bloodiest conflict in human history. However, it is not accurate to say that those soldiers who made it through the war lived very comfortable lives afterwards. The majority of the soldiers who stopped the carnage caused by divorce struggled with significant mental health issues. At this time, people on Ukrainian soil are enduring a similar kind of suffering. Terrible things are happening to Russian service members serving in. The psychological state of the Russian armed forces was revealed in reports from the Russian media. Putin started the war in Ukraine a year ago for his own political interest and to compensate for the losses that Russia had already suffered. Since then, tens of thousands of Russian soldiers have died in the conflict. At that time, Vladimir Putin issued a mobilization decree, which resulted in the deployment of approximately 300,000 additional Russian soldiers onto the battlefield. It is common knowledge that 1 million Russian soldiers are currently serving in an active capacity in the Russian army, while nearly 2 million Russian soldiers are members of the reserve forces. The most recent information that was made public by the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense revealed that the Russian army has suffered the loss of approximately 155,000 soldiers up to this. It is currently unknown how many soldiers have been hurt in the fighting. A significant number of Russian soldiers were unable to survive the major conflict that took place on Ukrainian territory. After taking part in the war, a significant number of Russian soldiers began to experience symptoms of psychological distress. Thousands of Russian soldiers were unable to withstand the unfolding tragedy any longer day. Because of this, a good number of them were sent back home. Because the health of citizens or soldiers is not a high priority for the Kremlin, the Moscow government was unable to provide any kind of treatment program for these soldiers. The government led by Putin is determined to win this war by any means necessary. A Russian soldier who was 25 years old recounted his experiences while serving on the front lines. He went by the name of Michael Lai, along with every other Russian soldier soldier, was reluctant to take part in this war. However, Putin and the other Russian commanders coerced him into going to the front lines on the battlefield. Ovi was subjected to significant trauma during the operations that were being carried out by the Ukrainian army, which was attempting to defend its territory against the invasion of Russian forces. Bullets were fired over Lona. The majority of his friends who had come to the front with him were killed right in front of his eyes. The young soldier had a seizure because he was unable to deal with what he had seen and had to witness. Ovi ended up on the ground as a direct consequence of the fear and panic that he experienced on the battlefield. The young Russian soldier passed out and was unable to speak for a considerable amount of time, even though Mamo was experiencing halak. The Russian commanders continued to send him to the front lines because Ovi was on guard duty at the time. He saw that the Ukrainian army was once again organizing an operation against them. This was a serious error on their part because he saw the operation being planned against them. Suddenly, he reached for his gun and began firing shots in all directions. But in fact, there was no one else around, apart from the Russian soldiers who were stationed there. Once more, Lipov experienced a hallucination concerning the terrible event that he had gone through. The Russian commanders made the decision to return Lipov, who was experiencing psychological issues, to his home country. When the young soldier finally got back to his hometown, everyone noticed that he had changed. His ongoing mental health issues were not. During the day, he would have hallucinations, and at night he would have nightmares. He would not communicate with anyone and would wake up every morning drenched in blood. His family was extremely concerned about the situation. Nevertheless, they attempted to get in touch with the relevant authorities in Russia, but did not hear back from them. The thing that gave Labma the most cause for concern was the possibility that the murderer Putin would send him to battle once. His mother stated that Ovi would wake up from his nightmares every night yelling, "I don't want to fight." Ovi was filled with rage and sorrow upon learning that Putin was to blame for the deaths of his friends. According to him, Putin was the most dangerous killer. Natalia Ov, Lima's mother, who always screamed when she woke up in the morning, experienced a traumatic awakening. A terrible thing had happened to Nutella Lov that morning in their home in the snowy chaos south of the Russian capital, Moscow. Natalia Love was relieved to think that her son had awoken peacefully that morning. However, she was shocked when she discovered that he was nowhere to be found in his bedroom. Natalia Leno, upon realizing that the window was ajar, looked down to where her son was lying and saw that he had been killed. The death of the young Ovi was by. However, by the time his mother placed the call for an ambulance, it was already too late. Lino, who was only 25 years old, had already been killed for Putin's political purposes. Ovi was not the first or the last person to do it. As a result of the traumas caused by the war, dozens of Russian soldiers took their own lives as the only way out of there. Over the past few weeks, at least 5 more Russian soldiers have taken their own lives within the country. Families in Russia who have seen their sons and fathers murdered are incensed at Vladimir Putin. Natalia Ovi holds Vladimir Putin responsible for the passing of our son, Natalia Ov, who believes that Vladimir Putin should be held responsible for his actions, is eager to see an end brought to this pointless conflict as quickly as. Protests against the war are taking place nearly every day in Moscow, which is the capital and largest city of Russia. Russian families whose children are fighting in Ukraine are making statements against Putin, including the mother of a soldier who said she did not want her children to die for what Putin said. These families are speaking out against Putin because their children are fighting for him. It's a mystery to me why my son is currently living in. I am unable to contact him. I have no idea if he is still alive or not. My goal is for him to either escape from the Ukrainian army or surrender to them, but I'm not sure how to put it across to him. Perhaps he is tuning into this interview in some way. I don't want anyone to perish for Putin. Least of all, my son. I won't stand for. Don't let anyone perish because of the political aspirations of a monster who's 70 years old. Immediately following these statements made by the Russian soldier, the protesters in Rat Square began chanting slogans. Unanimously, Russian families demanded that Vladimir Putin step down from his position as president. When confronted by the families of Russian service members, the Kremlin's administration is power. Putin is suffering a serious loss of credibility in the eyes of Russian households. Putin, the leader of Russia, had previously stated that he would participate in a program in which he would listen to the demands of the mothers of the soldiers. It was reported that Vladimir Putin had a meeting with the mothers of fallen soldiers, but it turned out that this was an elaborate hoax. The women who appeared in the program under the guise of Putin meeting with Russian families were intelligence agents working for Putin. Putin did not have the intestinal fortitude to confront the Russian families. In order to deceive the general public, soldiers would rather put together a sham program. The president of Russia made numerous attempts to speak with the families who took part in the program, but he was unable to connect with any of It was discovered as a result of the investigations conducted by Russian reporters that these women had previously been around filling in a variety of roles, such as an ice cream seller, a soldier, or a cleaning lady. After it became clear that the program was an elaborate hoax, the Russian people's anger directed toward Putin has grown even more. The Russian people have lost faith in Putin because he constantly lies to them about the uprising of Russian families. The fight against Putin has emerged as the top priority for the country. Putin is completely helpless in the face of the ongoing uprising of the people. The people cannot be quelled by the police no matter how harshly they crack down on demonstrations. Additional interventions by the police against the families of Russian soldiers could be the first step toward much larger events taking place in. Putin has a significant amount of concern regarding a potential uprising led by the mothers of Russian service members. This uprising even has the potential to alter how the conflict between Russia and Ukraine will play out as a result of the uprising of soldiers who are mothers. Putin may be compelled to call an end to the war. Soldiers who are unable to contact their families while serving in the military often look forward to seeing their loved ones on television. Those Russian soldiers who paid close attention to the statements made by Russian families are currently attempting to reconcile with their families by surrendering to the Ukrainian army. The Ukrainian military is not revealing the identities of the Russian soldiers who have surrendered to them. Additionally, it makes it easier for them to return to Russia by exchanging them for other prisoners. In addition, the government of Ukraine has declared that the families of the soldiers who have surrendered will be reunited with them. The first thing that is done to welcome surrendered soldiers is to provide them with hot meals and clean clothes. After that, the service members are given permission to speak with their families via video call. After hearing what the Russian mothers have to say, all of the soldiers are considering submitting to the Ukrainian army's authority and surrender. There is a great deal of anticipation among the mothers of Russian soldiers for a call from their sons at any moment. What are your thoughts on the psychological trauma experienced by Russian soldiers while Putin's decision to go to war is being influenced by the responses of the mothers of Russian soldiers? What are your thoughts on the fake program that Putin has been running?